We're going to take a look here at 16A. We're going to take a look at the examples, so you should have these notes already from the notes section of this video. So here's the example portion. So in order to graph tangent and cotangent, the things that we want are the period. Okay, so we want to be able to find the period, and that's pi divided by the number in front of the x, which is pi. So in this case, the period is 1. So we're going to go from the beginning to an end, a distance of 1. And so then we want to find the asymptotes. The asymptotes are setting the that pi x equal to negative pi over 2. So then in order to solve that, I divide by pi. Let's take a look at what that looks like here. So I have negative pi over 2 divided by pi. So that's negative pi over 2 times 1 over pi. And when I multiply those out, I get negative pi over 2 pi. And the pi's cancel. But because nothing was left on top, there's a 1 there. So that's negative 1/2. So my first asymptote is at negative 1/2. Well, I could hopefully know that because, scroll back down to our example here, that because this first asymptote is going to be over here at negative 1/2, that I know that if I have to have a distance of 1, a period of 1, that the second asymptote over here has to be at, that's right, a 1/2. That distance has to be 1, right? There's a negative 1/2 on the left, and a half has to be on the right in order for it to be 1. But you could also find the ending asymptote by doing pi x equals pi over 2, dividing by pi on both sides, and that would give you this 1/2 as well. And so you could divide by pi. Pi over 2 divided by pi is still 1/2, except there's no negative in front. Okay, so it's the same steps as the last one, except no negative. Now we've got everything. We've got the asymptotes. This is a tangent graph. Tangent's going to go up to the right and down to the left. Done. Problem number B, or letter B rather, we've got the negative 2 in front. That negative 2 for our purposes isn't really going to do anything to this. Okay, and so for us, we're looking for the period, which is pi over 1. So that's pi. So it's going to go from one side to the other side, a distance of pi. And then we want the asymptotes. The asymptotes are at x equals negative pi over 2. There's nothing with the x here. And at x equals pi over 2. So those are my two asymptotes. One's here at pi over 2, and one's over here at negative pi over 2. So then I do have to account for the negative in front, though. So that negative in front is going to flip this upside down. So my graph, instead of going up to the right, is going to go up to the left and down to the right. Okay, so that negative still flips things. It flips the tangent graph just like it flipped the sine and cosines, and it flips the quadratics, and it flips the absolute values. All of those things get flipped when we put that negative out in front. Let's take a look at some cosine ones, cotangent ones rather. So we want the same things here. We want the period of this cotangent, so that's pi divided by the number in front of the x, which is a 1/4. So pi divided by 1/4 is 4 pi. We want to find the asymptotes here. But the asymptotes of this are going to be x over 4 equal to 0. That's going to be my first one. And so I multiply by 4 to get rid of the fraction, and x is equal to 0. And my second one is going to be x over 4 is equal to pi, because my cotangent graph usually starts at 0 and usually ends at pi. Okay, I usually have asymptotes at 0 and an asymptote at pi. So that's the things that I'm going to set this equal to. So I multiply by 4, and I get x equals 4 pi. Well, that should make sense. If I'm starting this at 0, and I'm not doing a phase shift, okay, I'm not moving it left or right or up or down or anything like that, it should start at 0 still. Okay, and if my period is 4 pi, it should end at 4 pi. Okay, and so it shouldn't be, hopefully that it's not too tough for you to see that that's where these things should be. Okay, it should have a beginning at 0, should have an end at 4 pi, because the period is 4 pi. That's when it starts to repeat again. So cotangent graph, halfway in between here, is going to go up to the left and down to the right. There's no negative in front of that, and so that's the regular cotangent graph. You could, of course, draw a couple of these in here. So if you wanted to draw another one that goes up and down here, where this is negative 4 pi. Yikes, that was horrible. Negative 4 pi, that's what that says. And this is in here at 2 pi, and that's fine, negative 2 pi. You could have more than one on these graphs if you want to. I'm looking that you understand the period, where the asymptotes go, and what the graph actually looks like. Where does it go, up to the left or up to the right? So then D here, we want the period. The period is pi divided by pi over 3. So if I do that, pi divided by pi over 3, change that to multiply, flip this over. When I multiply that, the pi's are going to cancel and I get 3. Okay, so the period is 3. Well, again, thinking about this cotangent graph, cotangent has asymptotes at 0 and at the end of the period. Well, the end of the period is at 3. So hopefully you can get to a point where you don't even have to do anything really to this. You know that you're going to have it at 0 and you're going to have it at 3 for the cotangent. But if you're not sure, go ahead and do the asymptotes here. So I'm going to have pi over 3x equal to 0. So I'm going to multiply by 3 to get rid of the denominator here. And then I get pi x equals 0, divide by pi, and x is still equal to 0. Okay, so there's the first portion of that asymptote is at 0. My second one is pi over 3x is equal to the end of the period is supposed to be at pi. And so if I multiply by 3, I get pi x equals 3 pi. Divide by pi, and x is equal to 3. Okay, and so that's my ending asymptote. I've got an asymptote here at 0 and an asymptote here at 3. So that matches up with exactly what our intuition said, where they should have been. So then halfway in between here, this is a cotangent graph. It's supposed to go up to the left and down to the right, but I put a negative in front, and so it's going to go up to the right and down to the left. And you could, again, put in more periods than just one, but I'm looking for just one. Right? If you have questions on that, make sure you're asking them in class. This is a little bit, hopefully, a little bit easier for you than sine and cosine, but it is different than sine and cosine. So you have to put in the time. You have to put in the thought process of where these asymptotes are. You have to think through where the graph, what the graph actually looks like. And so it's not an easy thing if you don't put some time into it. Okay? So put your time in, and you will understand tangent and cotangent.